Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
And welcome everyone online who's tuning in with us today. I want to make just a couple of quick announcements. For here locally tomorrow night, I didn't put it on the paperwork, I just forgot about it. Bring your towels. Yeah, we'll have our own foot pails here. They have the bread and the wine, but we don't have your towels. So bring your own towels tomorrow for Passover service. For those who are tuning in, we've had a number of people requesting, since we've been growing on the live streams, people are scattered so many places, they don't have a place people to meet with. So we've got online, you can actually download it, or you can live stream with us. We'll be setting up the table here, and we'll be doing as we've done in years past. But you're welcome to participate in the Passover service with us tomorrow night at 7:30, beginning 7:30. Then, of course, on Monday, it's not a commanded assembly, but it is commanded that we observe the night to be much observed. And that's when the Jews will be taking the Seder, what they're taking to. They still do it in the old way of the Old Testament rather than the way that Jesus Christ constructed us through the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 11, I think it was. 11 is to, he said, well, Paul says, I've received of the Lord, which also I instruct you. On the night in which he was betrayed, he took bread and he broke. And so that's what we do. We do just as the Apostle Paul was instructed by Jesus Christ. And so the difference is nothing's changed with Passover. It's still the 14th. We do it the way in the covenant that Jesus Christ gave us, whereas the nation of Judea, or the Jews today, they still keep it on the same night because they do not believe that Jesus Christ is their Lord and Savior. The only difference for them is they can't sacrifice the lamb. I mean, the cow is the red heifer, as they would say, or the cow. But they're trying to. They're trying to, and who knows what will happen. All right. I'm going to do part 2 of this sermon I began a couple weeks ago. When kings go forth to war, it's 1 Chronicles 20, verse 1. It says at the end of the year. Is that my battery again? We just swapped batteries. Oh, okay. And I don't want to get into this sermon and start doing that. Let me see if I can make sure I get that thing right. Okay. We'll try it again. All right. What I wanted to say here is that we could be in a different world today. It wouldn't have took much this past week for what things were going on with rockets firing back and forth. Somewhere within the leadership and the dynamics between Iran and Israel and some of the other nations, everyone had to save face and yet not escalate the war, but they showed that they were willing to escalate the war. The unusual thing about this past week was that each of the nations notified other nations what they were doing in advance to give them time to prepare and to be ready. And so when rockets began to fire and everyone held their breath, people began to wonder what was going on. Before a single rocket from Iran actually entered the airspace of Israel, they had already sent a letter to the UN that they were finished, it's done, it's over. Of course, Israel, coming back, said, no, you can't shoot 350 rockets at us and tell us it's over. And so they had to respond. And their response was quite limited for what they did. And they also warned through the back channels, believe it or not, through Russia, Iran and Russia to the United States, what they were doing to try to bring this escalation down a little bit in time. So we sit here today and back to business as usual, wars and rumors of wars. That's changing, and it is changing rapidly. We're going to talk about that today. But more importantly, what you're seeing coming up on your screen right now is we're tying all this into the Great American Eclipse of 2024, because you see, I believe, and I believe we pointed out, and we're going to carry through today in part 2 of this sermon, that this is showing us that we are near that appointed time for the return of Jesus Christ. We're at the time when you see the rockets are not going to be withheld. It will be unlimited warfare, and we'll move into a stage of World War III, all leading up to the armies that will surround Jerusalem. Now that the eclipse is past, what can we expect? Well, tomorrow night, right before sunset, as we're participating in Passover, there's a comet that's coming. It's called the Devil's Comet. Quite interesting. It is at the closest point of its orbit, and it won't be back for about 70 to 80 years. It's at the closest point of its circulation to the sun as we're participating in taking a Passover service. Interesting name, the Devil's Comet. And then during Pentecost, as we move into the spring season, as we move into summer, it will be the closest point to the earth at that time. So there's things going on in the heavens that we need to take a look at and what's going on. We're living in the era of endless disasters. Over the past several years, we've been hit by one disaster after another, and the pace of these events have picked up steam in 2024. So what can we look for as we go forward? At sundown on April 8th, 2024, the 7 Nineveh eclipse came and it went, and God's new year began. And you are in that new year. And as we said at the opening of that first slide that you've seen, we are in the time and the period where kings go to war. And this year has proven that point to be true. The Bible tells us that we're at that time now when kings are going to war, and we're seeing the escalation of war all around the world. Are we on the countdown to Armageddon? You have to wonder about that. You don't know for sure if it is or not. But as we sit here today, our Congress is voting to spend another $95 billion to help prevent wars in other countries, and $65 billion of it is actually going to Ukraine to continue their war. Ukraine has no chance to win that war. We've said that from day one. And Russia could, if they wanted to, they could overpower them and walk through there right now if they chose to. They really don't. They know they can't go beyond that because then you're in World War III. But that will change one day. Not yet, but we're moving to a time that we're getting close to that. So where are we today? So what I want to share with you today is that I believe that we are living in the shadow before the event. What event? The event that's going to bring down humanity, that Jesus Christ is going to have to step in to save mankind from destroying himself. So we look at things today, you're actually at the shadow. When you consider all of the world's events that are aligning together, you will find that they are in a perfect alignment to God's timeline, and I call it God's timeline. When I put these timelines together, they're not mine. We lost the sound over there. You want to move some of your wires over there and see if that works? Jiggle something. Kick the tire. Let's take it for a spin around the block. All right, we're working again. I call it God's timeline because it's not my timeline. I'm simply putting on a piece of paper through the actual historical facts of what we look through from history, through the biblical facts that was being recorded and saved for us from the Bible itself. And you put them down on a period of paper, and you got to get to a certain period of time. It's called the appointed time. And some people say, and some churches say that, well, we don't do timelines. Well, I'm sorry to say, God does. He really does. He's got an appointed time to get to what he's going to do. So you get to God's timeline, his seals, and his warnings. It's impossible not to conclude that we have moved into the time that Jesus told us to watch for just before his return. So let's take a moment now. I want to talk about the shadow. I'm going to take more time than I normally would as we build this sermon. Because of this, I'm actually going to do a part 3. Because I want to put all this together so showing where you go. Last time we talked about what was happening. Today we're beginning to put it together to where you are. And the next sermon in this series, we'll talk about where we're going to according to that timeline. The shadow is like God has cast that perfect shadow on us. And you know how shadows are. You grow up as a kid. Remember doing the little things on the wall and making animals? Yeah, everybody shaking their head. Yeah, we all did that. Shadows. Well, God's got shadows he tells us about. The perfect shadow of the fulfillment of the events that's on the wall right before our very eyes. In the shadows, what we're looking at is just like pre-World War II. And I dare say, if you go back and you study history, and I'm challenging and asking you, study World War II. Because you will find that the events, the sequences, the alignments, and how it grew and how it multiplied are identical to what's going on today. That was a shadow of what we can expect. Remember, there's a former and there's a latter. And in the latter, there's a physical that we can draw close to understand with our own eyes. And then there's the spiritual of things that's going on in the heaven. So God's allowed in this alignment a shadow of events leading up to World War II, and the nations today are lining themselves up to be like the pieces on a chessboard preparing for war. And that is exactly what we have seen in this past week. It's only by a miracle and God holding back. And believe it or not, there is an angel, there's a being that God has that are holding things back, and he's releasing things little by little as events go. But God warns us there's a time coming that it says, he who holds back, he will move him out the way, and you will begin to see the unfolding of events like we could never imagine, and even in our own mind and our wildest imaginations. So why? Why does God give us the shadow first? It was an interesting question. So I went to bed last night and I was contemplating, like, why the shadow? So I was up during the night and I got up this morning and I told Audrey, it was interesting as she proofs my PowerPoints to make sure it doesn't go through as too many mistakes that's in it and she can catch it. And she says, I like the shadow idea. So I said, well, that was the thing that came to my mind. So let me go into the shadow just a little bit. So as I go to the shadow, I want you to pay attention here. If you can't grasp all the timelines, because we're going to get into some complicated alignments between the end of this sermon and next sermon. And it's worth the time that you can take to understand those alignments. But if you can't get into all that right now, understand the shadow of what's going on. Why the shadows? To answer that, let's look at the series from April of 2023 on the economic woes. Now, you might remember this. This was just about a year ago that we brought these out. So this was just prior to the Feast of Tabernacles, as I said. This was a year ago. I believe this was given in April of 2023. Amazing. Just 1 year later, we have moved from the cycle, and from that new Shemitah cycle, we began with the Shemitahs. And in the Shemitahs, that was God's countdown to his appointed time. So in that series, God led us to understand, to get to that appointed time, that he had a way for us to understand how he was getting there. So he would cast a shadow. And in that shadow, we would follow through to where we're going. Following that series, we went into the doomsday clock. So as we got closer and closer to the time, God says, understand the fruits. And so we went into the doomsday clock and we looked at the conditions as the world was changing, getting close to that appointed time. Following that, we went into 2023 into the transition of what was taking place last year. And as you go back, you can look at your conditions, your personal life, your finances, your work, things you do, are under strain compared to what they were a year ago. I don't care what you say and hear on the news about how great this economic system of our country is. It's destroying the nation we live in. And they're lying to us. When they talk about unemployment, you look at unemployment, what a lie, what a farce. Believe it or not, in 2006 or 2008, when it finally began to tip, in 2009, there were about 90 million people under the worst economic recession in modern times. 90 million people in America were not working. You know what it is today? When we're doing so great? 106 million. There's 16 million more people out of work today than there was at the worst economic crisis, and they're saying we're doing better. I'm telling you, they're lying to you. And if you're only watching one network or two networks and they're on the left side, you're not getting a clear picture of what's going on today. So I'm asking you, like God says to do, weigh out the entire matter before you make decisions. After that, we went into this. Approaching the waters of Marah. This was important. This is an incredibly important sermon that I've had a lot of comments about, because this is your journey. In your journey, you're following the shadow. Because see, God's leading you. And you're in that shadow of who? Jesus Christ. And so now the shadow takes on a different meaning now when you go into understanding the journey. So when you understand your journey, what are we looking for? We're looking for the process. Because you see, God told us He's not going to do anything till He tells us first. So that means that everything we need to know is already here. It's already been written. What we didn't have is what He's revealing. In the revealing is the process. And in the process is how He's changing you and I. See, that process, He tests us, He tries us. Remember what He did with Abraham? And when with Abraham, He brought him through in from where he was into Egypt, and Abraham failed his test. Gave up his wife, said he's his sister. I don't know if I'd want to have been in that tent when they sent her back to Abraham with Sarah. There had to be a lot of sleepless nights in that particular time. But God tested him and tried him until he was ready. So in this process, here's what I'm telling you today. You can expect you're going to be tested. And you're going to be tried. And you need to be ready for that through that process. And we understand, I'm going to show you that through the shadow. So how do we get to that appointed time? And that's what God's telling us. In other words, He has to walk us just like little children. He's bringing us from here to here. He said, now I'm going to show you how I'm going to get you over there. And He opens up understanding. And we begin to understand the minor prophets now. Maybe give you another mic. You got a Harry or a John? Mike ain't working today. I don't know what this is. It back? Well, Danny, maybe you get that other mic lined up for me. Huh? Over where? Oh, over here? I'm going to go grab that mic for just in case. I can't put them both on or we'll get feedback. This is still on, so you got it off over there? Okay. This is my process, my testing and trials. All right. So that was the beginning of understanding that you're in the process now. God's bringing you through a lot of changes because, you see, the world's being deteriorating. That means He has to change you to be ready for that deterioration. That means your life as you know it is not going to be the same next year as it is this year. Your life this year isn't like it was last year. You're not going back to good old days. Your financial networks out there, if those of you who still have 401ks, when they say just invest with me and we're going to get you through this, and when things settle down, we'll get you on the other side, you're going to make a lot of money. There will be one more period of time that will happen for a short span of time. And when people think it's all been settled down, the crash will come. And everybody will have their money in and they'll be sucked in like a vortex down a hole that they won't recover from again. So now, Matthew 11 tells us this, verse 2. When John was in prison, he heard about the deeds of the Messiah. He sent his disciple to ask him, he said, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" Now, I didn't take a left turn on you here. I'm still working on the process. So why did I go to John? Think about it. When this came to him, John wrote to him, to Jesus Christ. Why? Because he was in prison. Jesus told him, no greater man. He went to baptize of John the Baptist. John saw the dove come down. He saw the miracles. He saw everything that Jesus Christ was doing. And yet, now he's in prison and Jesus Christ didn't even come to visit him. So he sends his disciples to Jesus Christ. He says, "Are you the one to come?" The doubt slipped in. Now, why am I telling you that? Because where you're going, you're going to find yourself in some terrible times. And you're going to begin to wonder, well, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe if I just forsake the Sabbath this one time. Maybe if I just take a job to get me through this period of time, I'll be better. Maybe if I don't say anything about the homosexuality, or we hide our heads and we try to hide. God will understand. You're being tested. You will be tried. So John goes on to say, go back and tell John what you hear and what you see. I went into this morning and I stopped right there. And I stopped there because, you see, there's coming a time that the Bible tells us about. There's going to be a famine of the Word. You're not going to turn your TV on and catch the program anymore. You're not going to be able to hear the preachers preaching to you. They're going to take the conservative values away from TV altogether at some point in time. You're seeing the riots around the country already. Here in America, they're shouting death to America, death to Israel. Most of your major cities, you see crime rising. All of these things are taking place. So what is Jesus Christ telling us here? Just like he told John, I'm telling you, you better know your Bible. And I'm asking you to do this. Understand the timelines. Why? Because in the timelines will walk you through where you can expect things to begin to happen within a reasonable period of time, within a year or so. And remember, I'm telling you not because they're my timelines, because they're not my timelines. Their knowledge and understanding is being revealed by God that we just simply put them on a timeline. That's all. If you could understand where you're going and the approximate time when these things begin to happen, because your family around you are going to be saying, you ought to be, remember Job's wife? Remember Job's wife? Just curse your God and die. Family members are going to tell you things like that. They're going to think, who do you think you are? Everybody else is doing fine but you. You're following this cult. These crazy people out there. They don't even have the right day to worship God. They got this stupid thing they call the Sabbath. Here's what I'm saying. The answer is, when you go through all these things, don't listen to Tom. You listen to this. What did Jesus say? What did you hear and what did you see? Don't let anybody take you away from that. And I'm saying this for Churches of God community, because I'm telling you, there are people watching the program that their ministry are saying that the sun, the moon, the eclipses, all these things mean nothing. Well, they don't understand. And I'm telling you, do not be deceived, because it does make something. It means something. We've been doing this now since 2014. And everything we have learned, the path, the process, the patterns, they're all falling into play almost exactly to the time in the month that they're supposed to. You can't make that stuff up. Going on, he said the blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed. The deaf hear, the dead are raised, the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. So the second point of the shadow is that when you follow where you're going, it takes the light's a little darker now where you're following the shadow. What Jesus Christ is saying, if he allows you to go through trials and troubles and tribulation, don't let it stumble and take it out on Jesus Christ. Because we're not going through anything that others hadn't gone through before us, as we're going through. And in fact, when Jesus Christ says, if you're not willing to count the cost, you might as well just pack your bags up and leave now, because you're not going to make it. You've got to count the cost as you go through these things in life. Now, that was the whys, but how about the what? Well, what about this shadow? What is that? What does that all mean to you and I? What does it mean to live in the shadow? Well, let's break that down now a little bit. The idiomatic meaning of the phrase living in the shadow is the expressive identification of an individual being the reflection image of the real object. Now that's interesting, because Jesus Christ says, let this mind in me be in you. No, we're supposed to be emulating him. We're given two things to consider with this object now. What? First is the person. The closer you get to the light, the greater the shadow becomes. Isn't that amazing? You ever notice that? You get closer and closer, the shadow gets darker and darker. You walk away from the light, the shadow fades. If you're not in the light, you have no shadow. So what Jesus Christ is telling us is walk in the light. The closer you walk to Jesus, the brighter your shadow is going to be. The closer you look like him. You know what else it tells us? That if you're in his shadow, that means he's between you and the enemy. You're protected. Isn't that amazing? You're in the shadow. Why? Because he's got you in his protection. In fact, he tells his angels when all these things begin to happen, go out there and mark those who cry and sigh. Go out there and protect them. Seal these people because you're in his shadow. You're protected. That's the one. That's the person. But how about the event? You'll love this. The closer you get to the event, the fainter the shadow becomes. In other words, as we get closer and closer to these events, the shadow gets fainter and fainter. Why? It's like the sun. As you watch the sun as it comes up in the morning, you got a long shadow. But as it gets rise high and higher over you and it's directly over you, you have no shadow at all. So what happens now is that God's given us the shadow to walk us through. And you're going to see events happen faster and faster as we go through these events. So that means the events that's happening now are going to happen in rapid succession. So eventually, they're going to be upon you. There'll be no shadow. Then you will be in the real event. Thankfully, right now, God's given us time. Why? Because we have to gear our minds to accept less. We live in the wealthiest, most abundant nation that ever existed. For us to be without, it means we got a little open spot in our cabinet that used to be full. That means all the extra stuff you got stored away everywhere, it's running a little bit lower. But you got plenty. You go to the feast these days. I remember going to the feast with the kids. Is that you got so much stuff, you got to pack it on top of your car, you drag it with you. Some nations they have nothing. They go there with a bag, and that's it. No food, no nothing. Even the Church of God communities in other nations. So now, going on with this, with John the Baptist now. Let's go back to John the Baptist for just a second. Look what John said. He said, I am not the Messiah, but I am sent ahead of him. You and I are the emissaries of Jesus Christ in this day, whether you realize it or not. That's why you have been called. We have not been called to come here just to have a great time, although we do. I mean, it's great to fellowship and love with one another, be able to have a meal and to sit down and talk and have people of like mind and talk about the Bible. But you got a job on your hands, whether you realize it or not. You've been called for a specific mission. There's a commission that God gave everyone. And he said, cry aloud and spare not. Excuse me. The churches today, they don't want to do that. They don't want to talk prophecy. They don't want to talk this. He says, you're just scaring the kids. Well, I'm sorry, that's what God said we have to do. And the children, whether they don't realize it or not, and the young people, and I felt this way. I look at young people and they say, man, it's not fair to me because I haven't had a chance to live. I didn't have a life. I didn't get married. I came into church when I was 19 going on 20. At 20, I'm thinking the same thing. We're going to a place of safety in 72, or Christ is coming back in 75. I said, man, that's not fair. I said, that's not fair. I hadn't had a chance to live. They're going to have the greatest opportunity to live of any generation that ever existed because Satan's put away. All wars are over. They're going to be beating their swords into plowshares. That's what you have to tell the young people. You're still going to have a chance to have a life, but it's a better life. It's a healthier life. You got a real short span of time we got to get through. And when you're through that, it's over. It's over. And then God's got you in his hands. He's got you secure. You're in that shadow. See the light? I can't see there's a shadow in my hand from that light. And that's where your children is going to be. He went on to say this. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. He said, the friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. He said, that joy is mine, John said. Because his disciples were saying, hey, Jesus is becoming more popular with the people than you are. He said, then I've done my job. You know what I like when I go visit new churches? Inevitably, somebody comes up to me and he says, I never heard of you before. I said, thank you. And they look at me funny. I said, then I've done my job. I said, why are you here? He said, well, they were talking about this and talking about that. I said, that's the message. I said, that's what you're supposed to talk about, not me. And so the thing with John, that's the example that John gave, is you're not the issue here. I'm not the issue here. Jesus Christ is. Look what he says. He must become greater, I must become less. And so as we talk about Jesus Christ and his return and where he's coming, he has to become greater. You have to be able to tell the story and keep yourself out the picture. It's not about us. We're messengers, like John the Baptist. That's all we are, is messengers. Headlines. Now, I did all of that. I don't have a clock. So I have no idea how long I've gone. Uh-oh. I tell you who forgot to put the clock up, but Clayton would be really upset with me. I'll keep an eye on it. Now we got 2 clocks. That one says 25 after 1. That one says 10 till 2. Can you just feel all the excitement in the air here? Well, you talk about, you say, I don't like organized religion. Then I'm telling you, come here. All right, I'm about 30 minutes in. Now I'm about ready to begin the sermon. I see what I mean? We have to go to a third one. Now, did you get anything out of all that? Yeah, we did. You know why? Because that's something you can sink your teeth into. You can wrap your mind around that. You can understand, because you see that's a part of your life and what's going on and what's changing. Timelines and all the sequences. And this was going to be a good sermon, I thought. All right, let's try that again. All right, that's working good. It's louder too, huh? Okay. You know, I found when I do sermons that quite often when I feel like they're most important is the technology doesn't work well. It's crazy, but it's true. There's so many interruptions. It's hard to keep focus and keep everyone's attention too. I know when we first started doing like green screen and all that stuff, what a disaster. Poor New Orleans, I felt sorry for them. You know, they had to sit there and listen to all that garbage. All right, headlines. I backed up because I wanted to go through the shadow, because when I was putting the sermon together, it's like the shadow. And I kept asking myself about the shadow. The shadow is so important because what God's doing, he's separating the world and you. When the world saw that eclipse, right? I mean, millions of people all around the world. People did not understand what God was doing. That was the shadow of God to his people, telling us, this is your warning. You need to make a choice. It was a separation, just like with the children of Israel. God separated the children of Israel. Those who obeyed God, they didn't go through any more plagues. The plagues went through Egypt, but they didn't go over them. If the children of Israel didn't obey God's word, they suffered the plagues. When it came to when the death, the destroyer came over, if they went out before that, whether they were an Israelite or not, if they disobeyed that law, they were dead. You see how important this is? These shadows are walking us through the separating of God's people for you to make a choice. All you tuning in to make a choice. All your friends you can share this with in your churches, in the community, in families. Whether they believe you or not, tell them anyway. Remember, if News and Nuggets will say they'll love you for it or not. There'll be a lot of or nots before this is all over. Last week, let's walk through quickly now what happened last week to show you how misunderstandings are and how the world is being deceived. Iran fired over 350 drones, missiles into Israel. It was the first ever direct attack from Iran to Israel. In a war that everyone says they don't want to see escalation, it just escalated. 9 countries, believe it or not, 9 countries were involved in this. They were brought in and just interacted in the Middle East war in this Guns of April. The attack. Here's the alignment of the attack. At least 9 countries were involved in this military escalation, with projectiles that were fired from Iran, Iraq, from Syria, and from Yemen. 4 different places. Had they chosen to, they could have decimated Israel in a horrible state. But all the rest of the countries fired limited missiles and limited projectiles. Had they all shot what they had, they couldn't have stopped them. God didn't allow that yet, because this is the shadow. It's to prepare and get everybody ready for all of these things. The other thing that's coming out in the news now that wasn't known is that Iran shot their ancient arsenal. In other words, the original missiles, the older missiles, the slower missiles, the louder ones, the ones that didn't have as much energy. In fact, they said maybe half of them didn't even get off the ground. But the newer missiles that they shot, out of the 11 they shot, 7 got through. Now they got an arsenal of the modern weaponry. And that means danger is at the door of coming. In the attack, they're down by Israel. In the attack, they prevented the attack. Israel, the United States, the UK, and Jordan shot down missiles. 4 countries shot them down. So 9 countries, just like that, are being involved. And it was limited. Believe it or not, 350 was limited. It's amazing that no more people didn't die from all this as it went through. It's amazing that the rockets didn't fire and start killing people in Jordan as they went over the Jordan or Iraq, as they went through all of these things. This is the missile defense system that they used. They had the Iron Dome that we're so familiar with. Then they had David's Sling. Then they had the Arrow system. Now there's more systems than just this, but these are the systems that they used. They cover at least 1,800 miles. So when they shot off, they knew immediately when they shot. How'd you like to be living in Israel, knowing in the next few hours there'll be rockets dropping all over Israel, going through there? But that's what they lived into. Iran, after they did this, they shot and then they sent a letter and they tell them, we're finished, it's done, we're satisfied. Oh, really? It doesn't work that way. Iran urged Israel not to retaliate in the military after its own unprecedented missiles and drone attacks they felt was justified at the time. So then they were waiting for the next assault for Israel to respond, because they said they're going to respond. Michael Herzog, the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., and Wednesday that Israel must respond to Iranian strikes in the country. He said, brushing off the warnings from America and his leaders and other allies fearful of a regional war between the 2 powers. He went on to say, this cannot just pass. It cannot go unanswered, he said. So Israel knew they had to make a choice and make a decision. When Israel decides to do something, they usually do it, then everybody hears about it afterwards. This time everybody knew it was coming. So they did something behind the channels, it's coming out now, to let them know they was coming. They had to do something to settle things down. So believe it or not, all these missiles, cooler heads actually did prevail. But it's not over by a long shot. They said that nothing would remain if Israel responded. Well, they did, and Iran said they're happy anyway. Iran's president vowed to completely destroy Israel, he said, if it launches even the tiniest invasion. Iran president, who vowed to completely destroy Israel, said he will proceed with even the tiniest invasion of his own country. President Ibrahim Raisi spoke Wednesday at the annual Army parade. He said a massive and harsh response would follow as the country braced for potential Israeli retaliation. Well, it came, and it went, and now everybody seems to go back to the respective corners, waiting for the next round to begin. So when you go through this, the question is, what set off all of this? Well, depending on what news you're listening to, they'll say, well, it was Israel. They did an unprovoked attack into the embassy in the foreign nation up there. But is that what happened? Iran claims it was an unprovoked attack on their embassy in Syria and their generals. Is that true? No. Again, it's a lie. That isn't what happened. So what happened? Nearly 6 months earlier, on October 7th, Hamas attacked on Israel. Following letter came out. This was 6 months ago from the attack. The letter just came out at the beginning of April, this letter. The Iranian Coalition Council of the Islamic Revolutionary Forces, which ties to the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, issued the letter on April 3rd, showing the mourning and appreciation for Mohammad Reza Zahedi, according to U.S.-based Middle East media. What did that letter state? That's April 3rd, almost 6 months after it came out. The report was about the general being killed in the airstrike. The letter on April 3rd, 2024, from the coalition said it is nothing short of an admission of the support and guilt of the planning and the carrying out October 7th and the raid of Israel, killing over 1,300 and taking over 200 captives. This is what sent the missiles into the attack. The strategic role of the martyr Zahedi in the consolation and strengthening in the resistant fronts and in the planning and the execution of Al-Aqsa flood. Once Israel got confirmation of who planned that attack on October 7th, they immediately took action within 2 weeks and went and killed that man. That's what that attack was. It was not unprovoked. It was following the admission by their own people of who did it and when. So when the world tells you, and CNN and all the rest of them, that was an unprovoked attack, it's a lie. Because they will not play this letter. This letter is a matter of historic fact. He said, in part of the great pride that will transform the quiet efforts of this great commander into eternal history of the struggle against the occupation by the Zionist regime. Now, whether we realize it or not, there's something else that just opened up, another shadow. You just seen another shadow right here of another event that's taken place. That God has just opened the door for us is right there. You see I just circled that? The Al-Aqsa flood. It was in the middle of a desert. But they called it a flood. Where have we heard that before? Where does the Bible talk about a flood? Revelation 12, verses 15 through 17. This is the shadow of the event. Has God just opened the door for you and I to see the war in heaven? Well, let's talk about that real quick like. The serpent cast his mouth out as a flood, and after the woman that might cause her to be carried away by the flood. And the earth helped the woman. The earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon is cast out. And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now let's stop. I've been telling you now in this series that this is the beginning of the separation between the world and God's people. What you're looking at here is the shadow of what's coming. Is at some point in time, whether it happens yet, it's taking place now or not, or in the next year or two, which probably more likely closer to the period where you see the time of Jacob's trouble, is that when this event takes place in heaven, Satan's coming after you and I. God is preparing you for this event in heaven to be ready when he comes this way. And I believe he just showed us that event's coming soon. Now let's go on. Let me back that up again. All right, so now let's go on with this, and let me show you something else. This parallels events taking place right now, right before our very eyes. Now I'm telling you, this is not a sermon that sounds wonderful out of a Bible. I'm telling you, you're living in historic biblical times right now. You're living at times where prophecy is being fulfilled in front of your very eyes. And if you're not going to be awake for this, you're going to be taken unaware. So when I tell you these things, it's not to make you feel good. It's to get your mind in the Bible and to change your lives. And to get ready. See, tomorrow night we go to Passover. When you finish with that Passover, you walk away tomorrow night, you walk away perfect. Every sin that you've ever committed is gone. You walk away with Jesus Christ and his blood. You walk away fresh and clean, and you begin to prepare for the new year. Why is it happening right now? It's so that Jesus Christ can prepare you to remove your sins and get ready for what's coming. So he can watch over you. Now let's talk about these parallel events. 2 Thessalonians 2:7 says this, "For the secret power of lawlessness is already at work, but the one who holds It holds it back, will continue to do so till he's taken out of the way. In other words, God's only allowing Satan to do so much today. That's changing, because you see, he's giving you the warnings. Seals are being opened. When they open, they don't close again. That means everything that went before is following through, is when it goes through these things. So now we have on earth and heaven a parallel of these events. And it appears, let's pull that up now. It appears that we're at the point of time that God is sending the warning to his elect that shortly Satan is going to be released. That person who holds back is going to be taken out the way, he says. And heaven help when that happens. If you had to put a time into this, I don't have a time and date, but I have a time on a scale. And on that scale, I'm going to think it's somewhere around that fourth seal. Why the fourth seal? Because a third of the planet, or a quarter of the planet is destroyed. That means billions of people are killed. It's like that's beginning of everything falling apart. When is that? It's just a few years ahead. If we're on the right timeline, it's just a few years ahead. Now, I don't know about you, but that ought to wake you up. Because you see, when you have no one to protect you, and God takes that protection out the way, this world ain't got a chance. So God's telling you right now, choose. Make a choice. Separate from the rest of the world. Come out of the world. He said, and follow me. He said, choose life. So you choose life. You live. I don't know how to be any clearer, any more frank, any more sincere than that to tell everyone. It also appears that we're at the shadow of what must soon follow. When you see all these things happening, these things are not by accident. God steers events so that you and I can understand what's going on. So you've seen me use this slide over the last 6 months. War. We talked about the horse going out. Well, you're seeing it going out today. Harder than you've ever seen it before. The Bible gives you specifics to look for now. Remember, we're understanding the process of what we're going through. But there's always been wars and rumors of war. Yes, they have. They are changing. And what has always been will not always be. And what is coming has not been. The Bible gives us the specific to look for. The former and the latter, a physical and a spiritual in the wars. So what God's showing us now, that there's wars that's coming, and they're going to happen rather quickly. When the children of Israel came out of Egypt, almost immediately they went to war. What does God do in you and I? If you go back to the waters of Marah, it shows you we're coming out of this world. We crossed that Jordan at the same time period, and God's walking us through these next years. What's in these next years? War. When the children of Israel, before they went to the promised land, what did they have? They had 7 years of war. That's what we're walking through now. You're walking in that right now. We almost immediately they went to war. You can find that event in Exodus chapter 17. They went to war on the second month after they come out of Egypt. And you know what? God was still leading them there. Amalek didn't care about God leading them by the cloud and the pillar of fire. He went to war with Israel anyway. Does that make any sense to anybody? They saw what happened to Egypt. It's been destroyed. Pharaoh's gone. They did it anyway within 2 months. The spirit of Amalek. In Exodus 17, verse 8 says, then came Amalek and fought against Israel in Rephidim. And look at Exodus 17, verse 16. God says, because the Lord swore that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. That means the spirit of Amalek that was then is alive today. And that spirit isn't afraid of God. He's going to do whatever he wants to. The only thing stopping him is that angel that's holding back. But as soon as God says, okay, let him go. That's what you're going to see going right after God's people. You see in 1 Samuel, King Saul and Amalek. Look what God told him to do. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel. He laid in wait, and he came up from Egypt. What do you think Satan's doing today? He's laying in wait. He's waiting just to get after God's people. Revelation, we just read it. He says he's going after the elect. He's laying in wait, just like Amalek did with the children of Israel when he came out of Egypt. He said, go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy him, everything they have. Man, woman, infant, suckling, ox, sheep, camel, and ass. Well, you know the story. I don't have to go through the story. Saul disobeyed. The families of Amalek lived, and they spread throughout the whole world, and that spirit is alive today. So now, watch this next connection. Fighting a modern-day Amalek. This is a quote from an IDF fighter. The Israel Defense Force is operating in Hamas against the heart of Gaza City for the first time in decades, he said. This was according to the Southern Commander-in-Chief Major General Yaron Finkelman. Look what he says. This generation, he said, is the generation of victory. What does he mean by that? What is God letting us see here? Is the last generation before God returns would be the generation that would put Amalek aside. And so what you're looking at is the physical, then the spiritual. And they're believing, why do you think Israel is so strong? Says, this time we must destroy it once and for all. Because whether they realize it or not, this is the last generation before Christ comes. And it's fulfilling the prophecy of the Old Testament that they would be there until Christ returns. And here, he says, this generation is the generation of victory. And so they will not back away. This is the type. This is the shadow of what is on the horizon. The spirit of Amalek, he'd be put away for the last time for 1,000 years. Satan would be put away for 1,000 years. That's what's on the horizon. When does all this begin? When kings go to war. It has begun. We're in that period of time right now. It is an end-time event. It says, and it came to pass that the year was expired at the time that the kings go out to battle. The end-time event. Now, there's the prophecy of the former and the latter, the battle in heaven, the battle on the earth, and you find it in Daniel 10. That is the forerunner. We're in the latter. What you're seeing take place over there is the physical. We're waiting for the spiritual. Daniel 10, verse 1, in the third year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, the thing was revealed to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar. He said, the thing was true, but the time appointed was long. So what was going on with Daniel was for the end time, is what he's trying to say. He said he understood the things, and he had the understanding of the vision. He said, in those days I was mourning for 3 full weeks. In the 20th day of the first month. When kings go to war. So Daniel's praying about the vision he's seeing. What's taking place? There's a battle going on in heaven. What do we read in Revelation? Satan is going to be released. There's a war that goes to heaven, and he's cast out forever. He says, no more. It's over. Where's it going? Right back here. Going to you. First month, the 24th day. That's coming up next week. Now, this is the shadow. This is not I don't think it's the real event yet. So I'm not saying this is the spiritual war going on right now, but there are spiritual battles going on. This is the warning of what's coming down the road. Let's get that straight. This is coming. When that takes place, we just went through what happens on the earth. That takes place, it's all coming. Who is he telling to? Persia. The king of Persia in the vision. Who's Persia? Iran. Why is the fighting with Iran going on? Because they're the ones who are stirring everything up. They're the ones who have the spirit of Amalek. They're the ones who's warning everybody what's coming down the pipe. And you're seeing it when? In the first month. So there it is. When it begins to line up. All these things are lining up. He goes on in verse 12. He says, from the first day, he says, that you set your heart to understand, to chasten yourself, the words were heard, and he said, I came. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But Michael, the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. Here is an angel sent from God to answer Daniel. Having a spiritual war for 21 days. Can't get through. Michael has to come. What do you think this planet's going to be like when God says, okay, move out the way, turn Satan loose? That's coming, you all. I don't think it's too many years down the road. And you need to set your mind to it that it is coming. And you need to set your mind, just like John the Baptist and to say, hey, listen, it doesn't matter what happens to me. I'm going to be in God's hands and his protection. And if I have to go through like Shadrach and Meshach, God willing, I'll go through it. Look what he said. He said, this is for the latter days. What he saw was the latter days. What you're seeing today is the shadow of what's coming. And what's coming is the battle in heaven and the battle that will take place on earth. To connect all that, to see what God's revealing, God has shown us up to this point, is this. First, we must never forget that all the things revolve around the center point, Jesus Christ. No matter how much you like to think about it, when you sit down and say, oh, why is the Lord let me go through this? It isn't about you. It's for you. Everything revolves around Jesus Christ. 2, just as Jesus fulfilled all things pertaining to his first coming, he will fulfill at his second coming. So in other words, all the prophecies we read, they will be fulfilled. Some prophecies have said will fail because God says he's going to cut time short. But the prophecies pertaining to Christ will be fulfilled. 3rd, we need to follow the understanding given as his appointed time and season. We don't have the day of the hour, but much has been revealed about the season of his return. Where are we at on time now? Are we about an hour? Huh? We're at 55 minutes. All right. If you don't mind, I'll go about 10 more minutes to where I can bring this to a close. I thought maybe I would this would have been a good stopping point. But I had some more I want to bring this to a close with. Here we go. Preparing for the storm. So what do you do in the meantime? You know, this is not just a fire and brimstone like it's over doomsday. No, this is to get you ready. Because you see, if you hold to Jesus Christ, you're going to make it through this. You know, you're not going to come out unscathed. Nobody is. You lived through Hurricane Katrina down here. You said, did you get any damage? Everybody got damage. Just to the extent. Everybody got damage. Nobody came unscathed. You're going to go through. You're not going to go through this unscathed. So there's disaster preparedness that goes on. Matthew 24 says this, therefore you be also ready, and for such an hour that you think not the Son of Man is coming. So then, who is that wise and faithful servant? I love this. Faithful and wise. You know, I've been reading this. I didn't remember the wise. I don't know why in my mind I keep thinking faithful. Who's that faithful servant? But God says the faithful and wise. So wisdom tells you need to be wise about what you're doing and what you're preparing for. Who's made him rule over his household to give him meat in due season. Blessed is that servant whom the Lord, when he comes, shall find so doing. Preparing for weather disasters. Now let's put this to physical, to spiritual, that we can understand. When you see a weather disaster approaching, you have every city, every town, they have preparedness programs. Depending on what city you live in, each city has a disaster plan of what could strike that city. Down here we primarily have flooding and hurricanes. If you're in the Midwest, you got tornadoes. In the north, you get the ice storms and things like that. But every city has a plan on how he prepares for it. The plans are long range and short range. Well, spiritual disaster preparedness, God has the same thing, whether we realize it or not. God's warnings and plans for his servants are built the exact same way. God gives us the long range and the short range warnings to prepare for. When I began to realize this, I said, oh, okay, now I understand why we had the Shemitah cycle. Because there's a long range, and then there's a short range preparation for what's coming. And God tells us what to look for in each one of the stages, just like the weatherman does. And it's interesting here, because you see, look, we had the 7,000 year appointed time, and in the time as it gets shorter, what happens? The shadows get less and less, and before you know it, you're down to 1 week. And as God says, a day is a year. A day is a year. You see that in Numbers 14:34. Remember when the spies went in, they're 40 days, and God punished them for 40 years. And you see that also with Ezekiel, when he's told to lay on one side, and he said each day is a year. And then he had to turn over for Israel. He had Judah one side and Israel the other. Each day he had to lay on the side a day for a year. So in the 7 days is a day is a year. So you have the 7 years. So then God gives us the 7-year plan for man. There's creation. Jesus' first coming, which was about 2,000 years ago. And then you have his second coming at 6,000 years. Hosea 6:2 we've covered before, just briefly. He said, after 2 days he will revive us. A day is 1,000 years. There's another one that says in Peter, a day is 1,000 years. So here we have 2,000 years, brings us around to, interesting, 2030, 31. Then we usher in the millennial reign in the third day. So there's two events set in motion from the heavens that mark the creation and mark the appointed time for his son coming to this earth. We've seen them both now. You've seen the alignment in heaven that you've seen from Revelation 12, from his first coming, and then you've seen the alignment of his second coming from Revelation 12 in 2017. Both of these events marked his first and his second coming. The Bible confirms that there would be signs in heaven. Well, we've got them. They're not fictionalized. They actually mark the difference of about 2,000 years, what you're looking at right here. So now let's take those now and let's just build the time on the cycles that God gave us to. So after 2,000 years brings us from his death to his return, about 20, 30, or 31. All of this is marked with the beginning of the countdown by the 8th blood moon tetrad. The 8th blood moon tetrad, 8 number means new beginnings. So what God has showed us from this time on is the new beginning of bringing this age to a close. Why 2015 and the 8? Because it matches the 4th day of the week. Now we've got the Shemitah cycle now brings us in a little bit closer to the shorter timeline of where we were. This cycle began in 1987. The first cycle ended in 1994. So now it's going to bring us to that third day. So what are we looking at? The 4th Shemitah of the final Jubilee paralleled the 4th day of the week and the 4,000th year of God's plan. This event took place right here, which matched perfectly the 7,000, the 50-week cycle with the 7 sevens, the 7-day week, and the timing of Christ's coming on the day of the week. Exactly. Not a mistake. All aligned up, absolutely perfect. Why? Because God said the signs in the heavens would tell us that. You know, in 2015, we didn't know all this. But it felt different. In fact, I kept saying something feels really different here. And it was where we're going through. At that time, we began to see the Pope raise up his ugly head, and we began to see the rise of the Holy Roman Empire as he instituted his 2030 agenda. That picture that looks like a snake, that looks like the serpent head, that's actually a building at the Vatican, in Rome, not at the Vatican, but it's in Rome. It holds 7,000 people, and it looks just like a snake. The gall to be able to do that before God. Then we covered the pattern of Satan going after. Remember, we got to follow the cycles. So we looked at the siege. And in anything after a siege, what happens? You break the walls after a siege, you get the breach. We are now in the time of the assault. This is the time of the assault. This is the time of war. Spiritual war and physical war. We brought that out to America under siege in 2018. We brought the repairing the breach because the breach was broken in 2021 because of COVID. The Constitution and its barrier, the protection for you and I began to break down. That was the breach in the wall for God's people. And now, we're at the period that if you're not careful, it's going to wear you down. The wearing down of the saints. And it follows the pattern in 2 Kings 25, showing the pattern of the fall of ancient Judah and the walls in Jerusalem. So now we begin to bring this to a close. Now I went through that fairly quickly because we've covered a lot of that before. But why did I do all that today? I wanted to show you something. The process that we've been going through, God has been throwing us, it's like a treasure hunt. And he opens up another prophecy. And he says, okay, go find it. And it's like God plays hide and seek with you and I. And he waits to see if you go look for it. He wants to see how serious you really are. Is that, remember when Jesus Christ, they came to him and he said, unless you drink my blood and eat my flesh, you can have no part with me. And everybody around him, they all left. They said, that's it, we've had enough of this. He turns around to his disciples and he said, will you leave me also? So God begins to open up all this understanding. And he sees if you're going to stay or if you're going to leave. If you choose to turn and walk away, your knowledge, your level, your understanding stops. Boom. Then you will go on and you think you're learning, but you're not. Because you have just turned your back on the one way Jesus Christ is going to walk you through the shadow of what's coming in that period of time. The most recent of the understandings that we just did, the rise and fall of America, showing that now, we have now hit the time, right here, that America begins to fall in 2024. You're seeing it taking place right before our very eyes. The nation cannot hold much longer than where it's at. By the end of this day, they will have voted to give away almost $100 billion again, with not one penny going to the wall to protect this nation. Not one penny. And people will say, well, they've already got a bill there. They won't pass the bill. No, that bill did not protect the border. It gave them ways to continue to bring everyone in and process them. And nobody wants to read and understand what the bill said. It was a way to process the entry of the illegals into our nation faster. It wasn't to stop them. It wasn't to put one penny into any more border construction. So we have no one protecting our nation. So then we've seen the two warnings, the warnings of 2017 and 2024, the great American solar eclipse of what's taking place. And we are there right now. That took place just about 2 weeks ago. Every single alignment that you have seen taking place have now meshed and come together, and you are now in a new phase of concern and warning as things begin to escalate, as we continue to move closer and closer to war. You are in the time when kings go forth to war. And I'm going to pick that story up the next time I speak in part 3, and when kings go to war.